Sometimes the person who saves your life is the one you never even notice, until the moment you realize they were the only one truly watching. Crystal chandeliers scattered warm golden light across the grand ballroom of the Hawthorne Foundation Gala in downtown Chicago, where the city's most influential executives, philanthropists, and public figures gathered beneath ceilings painted more than a century earlier. Conversations drifted through the room like soft music, interrupted only by the delicate clink of crystal glasses and polished silver trays carried by servers weaving silently between designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Claire Bennett balanced one of those trays with practiced hands, her white service jacket freshly pressed despite the long bus ride that had brought her there. At 28, she had learned that dignity cost nothing, even when everything else did. Earlier that afternoon, she had kissed her 5-year-old daughter Lily goodbye, promising she would be home before midnight if the babysitter stayed awake long enough. The extra shift tonight meant another week of groceries, another payment toward Lily's asthma medication, another chance to keep the lights on inside their tiny apartment on Chicago's South Side. Every careful step Claire took across the marble floor carried more than glasses of sparkling water and expensive wine. It carried responsibility. Across the ballroom, Ethan Carter finally arrived. The 39-year-old CEO of Carter Global entered without fanfare, though every head subtly turned toward him. His reputation had never been built on flashy entrances. It was built on impossible negotiations, quiet discipline, and an uncanny ability to remain calm while everyone else lost theirs. His charcoal suit fit perfectly, his expression remained unreadable, and even the photographers seemed hesitant to interrupt the measured confidence with which he greeted donors and board members. Claire noticed him only because nearly every server had been instructed to prioritize his table. Wealth had a way of rearranging an entire room without saying a word. She lifted a fresh tray prepared moments earlier inside the catering station and started toward the private reception area reserved for distinguished guests. Then something unexpected caught her eye. A man she didn't recognize brushed past the serving station just as another waiter stepped away to answer a supervisor. The stranger's movement was almost invisible, concealed behind a polite smile and effortless conversation. 2 fingers hovered above one crystal glass for less than a heartbeat. A tiny motion, barely enough to disturb the surface. Most people would have missed it entirely. Claire didn't. She stopped walking. Her heartbeat slowed instead of racing. Years ago, inside a hospital room filled with machines and whispered apologies, she had learned that danger rarely announced itself loudly. It often arrived disguised as ordinary moments everyone else ignored. The stranger continued walking without looking back. Around her, laughter filled the ballroom. A violin quartet began another gentle melody. Nobody reacted. Nobody noticed. Claire looked toward Ethan Carter, who was now thanking an elderly donor while an event coordinator reached for the very glass resting near the front of her tray. There wasn't enough time to explain. There wasn't enough time to accuse anyone. She had no proof. Only instinct. Only one impossible choice. Taking one slow breath, Claire quietly lifted the untouched glass beside it and switched their positions with a movement so natural that even the nearest guest never looked twice. She lowered the tray again and continued walking as though nothing at all had happened. Across the room, Ethan Carter happened to glance up at that exact moment. His sharp blue eyes followed the subtle exchange, watching the young single mother silently replace one crystal glass with another, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he stopped listening to the conversation around him. Claire set the tray onto the polished mahogany table with the same quiet precision she had practiced through hundreds of shifts, lowering her eyes as every server had been trained to do before stepping back. Ethan Carter never reached for the glass immediately. Instead, his attention lingered on the young woman walking away as though nothing unusual had happened. He replayed the tiny movement in his mind. She had switched 2 glasses. Not accidentally. Deliberately. There had been no hesitation, no stumble, no expression of surprise. It had looked calculated. Ethan had built a multi-billion-dollar company by noticing details other people ignored, and his instincts rarely failed him. "Excuse me," he said calmly to the event coordinator standing nearby. "Who was that server?" The coordinator glanced across the ballroom before answering. "Temporary staff, I believe. We hired additional servers through an agency this afternoon." Ethan gave a slow nod without taking his eyes off Claire. Interesting. At that exact moment, the catering manager hurried toward Claire with visible frustration written across his face. "Claire, what was that?" he whispered sharply. She looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "You switched Mr. Carter's glass." Claire hesitated for the smallest fraction of a second before answering quietly. "I thought another guest had almost taken the wrong one." The explanation sounded simple enough, but the manager frowned. "Do you understand how important tonight is? Those tables have assigned service. Every detail matters. We cannot have improvisation." Claire lowered her head. "I understand. I am sorry." The manager sighed heavily. "Finish this round, then report to the kitchen." Several nearby guests had already begun whispering after noticing the brief exchange. One woman in an elegant emerald gown leaned toward her husband. These temporary workers never seemed prepared. Another guest shook his head with quiet disappointment. Attention to detail used to mean something. Claire heard every word without reacting. She simply collected another tray and continued serving with the same calm expression she had worn all evening. Embarrassment had become a familiar feeling years ago. It no longer controlled her. Across the room, Ethan accepted polite conversation while discreetly watching her. Something about the situation refused to settle comfortably in his mind. If she had wanted attention, she would have apologized dramatically. If she had made an honest mistake, she would have looked frightened. Instead, she behaved like someone who had already accepted the consequences before making her decision. That was unusual. 20 minutes later, Claire entered the catering kitchen, where stainless steel counters reflected the bright overhead lights. The manager was already waiting. "The agency will receive my report tonight," he said firmly. "Your shift ends now." Claire quietly removed her serving apron and folded it with care instead of tossing it into the laundry bin. "Thank you for the opportunity," she replied. The manager seemed almost irritated by her composure. "You are not going to explain yourself?" Claire looked toward the hallway leading back to the ballroom, where laughter still floated through the closed doors. "No, sir. You are willing to lose your job over one strange decision." She gave a small, tired smile. "Some decisions make sense only if you were standing in the right place." Before the manager could ask what she meant, Claire picked up her worn canvas bag, slipped on her light gray coat, and quietly walked toward the employee exit. Outside, a cold Chicago breeze greeted her as she wrapped the coat tighter around herself and checked the time on her phone. It was almost 10 o'clock. Lily would already be asleep. Claire smiled softly at the thought of her daughter's peaceful face, never noticing that high above the ballroom windows, Ethan Carter had stepped closer to the glass, silently watching the lone figure disappear into the city night, while an uneasy question continued echoing in his mind. Claire had been gone less than 15 minutes when the evening changed forever. Inside the ballroom, another round of speeches had just begun as waiters quietly refreshed drinks around the room. Ethan Carter remained near the front table, only half listening to the chairman's remarks about charitable giving. His attention drifted repeatedly toward the entrance where the young server had disappeared. He could not explain why her calm expression refused to leave his mind. Then an unexpected sound interrupted the polished rhythm of the gala. A crystal glass slipped from someone's hand and shattered across the marble floor. Gasps spread through the room as Richard Holloway, a respected investor seated only a few feet from Ethan, suddenly reached for the edge of the table. His face lost its color. "Are you all right?" someone asked, rushing toward him. Richard attempted to answer, but seemed unusually disoriented. Within seconds, several guests stood from their seats while medical volunteers attending the charity event quickly moved into action. One physician knelt beside him with reassuring composure, checking his pulse while asking simple questions. The ballroom, moments earlier filled with elegant conversation, became strangely quiet. Ethan stepped back to give them space, his eyes instinctively moving toward the untouched glass still resting in front of him. The physician looked up at the event organizers. "Please clear some room. We need fresh air." Another volunteer carefully collected the remaining glasses from the table, placing them aside before anyone else could touch them. "Do not throw these away," the physician said calmly. "I would like them examined as a precaution." Ethan felt an unexpected chill despite the warmth inside the ballroom. His gaze locked onto the two nearly identical crystal glasses. One had remained in front of him all evening. The other had been picked up moments earlier by Richard after casually exchanging places during conversation with another guest. Ethan's heartbeat slowed as memory replayed itself with startling clarity. Claire switching the glasses, her steady hands, her complete silence, her willingness to lose her job without offering any explanation. Suddenly, none of it looked careless. It looked intentional. He turned sharply toward the event coordinator. "Where is the server who was dismissed?" She blinked in confusion. "The young woman? She left several minutes ago." Ethan's voice remained controlled, but every word carried unmistakable urgency. "Find the catering manager immediately." Within moments, the nervous manager arrived, expecting another complaint. Instead, Ethan asked only one question. "Did she ever tell you why she switched my glass?" "No, sir. She simply apologized and accepted being dismissed." "Did she argue?" "No." "Did she ask to keep her job?" "No, sir." Ethan looked toward the untouched drink still sitting exactly where Claire had left it. A strange weight settled in his chest. Most people fought desperately to protect a paycheck. She had walked away without defending herself. Why? Security personnel quietly reviewed surveillance recordings while the physician requested that the remaining beverages be preserved for routine testing out of an abundance of caution. Nobody was making accusations. Nobody knew exactly what had happened. But the questions multiplied with every passing minute. Then one of the security supervisors approached Ethan carrying a tablet. "Sir, there is something you should see." The recording showed the serving station from a high-corner camera. Guests moved naturally through the frame until one unfamiliar man briefly paused beside the tray. His hand hovered for less than a second before disappearing into the crowd. A few moments later, Claire entered the frame. She froze almost imperceptibly, stared at the glasses, then quietly exchanged their positions before continuing toward the ballroom. She never looked around for recognition. She never spoke to anyone. She simply made one silent decision and accepted whatever followed. Ethan watched the footage twice without saying a word. When it ended, he looked toward the dark windows overlooking Chicago and spoke so quietly that only the security supervisor heard him. "We did not dismiss the wrong employee tonight. We let the bravest person in this building walk away alone." By the time the gala ended, the celebration had vanished, replaced by quiet conversations and unanswered questions echoing through the nearly empty ballroom. Staff members folded linens and cleared tables, while security officers continued reviewing every camera angle available. Ethan Carter remained in the conference room beside the event office, studying the footage frame by frame. Every replay strengthened the same conclusion. Claire Bennett had not acted out of confusion. She had acted with purpose. Yet she had never once tried to claim credit. "Find her," Ethan finally said. His executive assistant, Lauren Mitchell, looked up from her laptop. "We have contacted the staffing agency. They only have a temporary file. Then use whatever they gave you." Lauren scanned the electronic records. Claire Bennett, 28 years old, temporary hospitality worker. Emergency contact is listed as unavailable. Mailing address. She paused. It appears to be an apartment building on South Halsted Street. Ethan stood immediately. "Have the car ready." "Tonight?" Lauren asked with surprise. Ethan buttoned his coat without hesitation. She walked away, believing we punished her for doing the right thing. "I am not waiting until morning." 35 minutes later, the black sedan rolled quietly through neighborhoods far removed from the glittering skyline where the gala had taken place. Expensive office towers slowly disappeared behind modest brick buildings, corner grocery stores, aging laundromats, and small family restaurants closing for the night. Ethan watched the city through the window in thoughtful silence. Chicago had always been his home, yet there were entire streets he had not visited in years. The navigation system announced their arrival just before 11 o'clock. Ethan stepped onto a cracked sidewalk where the cool spring air carried the faint scent of rain. The apartment building before him was old but carefully maintained. Fresh flowers sat inside recycled containers near the entrance, and someone had painted cheerful butterflies across a section of the concrete wall where the original bricks had faded with age. Small details. Someone here still believed difficult places deserve kindness. Ethan pressed the apartment buzzer listed under Claire Bennett. No answer. He tried again. A soft voice came through the speaker instead. "She is not home yet." Ethan looked up to see an elderly woman opening her second-floor window. "Are you looking for Claire?" she asked. Yes, ma'am. She is probably picking up Lily. Ethan smiled politely. Her daughter? The woman nodded warmly. 5 years old. Sweetest little girl you will ever meet. She studied Ethan's tailored coat with quiet curiosity. You are not from around here. No, Ethan admitted. I owe Claire an apology. The woman laughed gently. You and half the world, if you ask me. Before Ethan could respond, headlights turned the corner. An aging blue sedan pulled carefully against the curb. Claire stepped out carrying a small pink backpack while a sleepy little girl rested peacefully against her shoulder, wrapped in a yellow blanket decorated with tiny stars. Claire closed the car door as gently as possible so she would not wake her daughter. She turned toward the building and froze. For a long moment, neither adult spoke. The city seemed unusually quiet. Ethan noticed the dark circles beneath Claire's eyes, the worn sneakers, the loose strand of blonde hair escaping from her ponytail, and the tenderness with which she supported Lily's head without disturbing her sleep. Nothing about her resembled the dramatic hero people usually imagined. She simply looked like an exhausted mother trying to make it through another ordinary night. Claire shifted Lily slightly higher against her shoulder before speaking in almost a whisper. Mr. Carter, I did not expect to see you here. Ethan held her gaze, suddenly realizing that every speech he had rehearsed during the drive no longer seemed adequate. Standing in front of him was not the employee he had dismissed. She was the woman who had quietly carried a burden no one else in that ballroom had even noticed, and somehow had still found the courage to protect a complete stranger. Claire looked down at Lily sleeping peacefully against her shoulder before glancing back at Ethan. Would you mind keeping your voice down? She asked softly. She finally fell asleep in the car. Ethan nodded immediately. Of course. Claire shifted the little girl carefully and reached for the apartment door. I cannot leave her out here. She hesitated for a moment before adding, you can come upstairs if this is important. The apartment was small, but remarkably warm. A faded blue sofa sat beside a bookshelf filled with children's stories borrowed from the public library. Colored drawings covered one section of the refrigerator, each proudly signed in uneven handwriting with the name Lily. A tiny pair of pink rain boots rested neatly beside the door. Ethan had visited penthouses overlooking Manhattan, private villas in Europe, and estates worth tens of millions of dollars. Yet none of them had ever felt this alive. Claire gently carried Lily into the bedroom and returned a minute later after tucking the blanket around her daughter. She quietly closed the bedroom door before facing Ethan. Would you like some coffee? She asked. It is decaf. Regular coffee keeps Lily awake if she smells it before bedtime. Ethan smiled faintly. Coffee would be nice. Claire filled a small kettle, while Ethan noticed several prescription bottles arranged carefully beside a calendar covered with handwritten reminders. Every medication refill had been highlighted in yellow. Every doctor's appointment had been circled in blue. There was not a single luxury item anywhere in the apartment, only evidence of careful planning and constant sacrifice. The physician at the gala requested that the drinks be examined. Ethan said quietly, the security footage confirmed that you switched my glass after seeing someone touch it. Claire remained silent as the kettle began to whistle softly. Why did you not tell anyone? Ethan finally asked. She poured the hot water into 2 simple mugs before answering. Because I did not know what I had seen. You were certain enough to switch the glasses. Claire nodded slowly. Certain enough to be careful. Not certain enough to accuse someone. Ethan accepted the mug without taking his eyes off her. Most people would have shouted. Claire gave a tired smile. And if I had been wrong? An innocent guest would have been blamed in front of hundreds of people. Sometimes the safest decision is the quietest one. Ethan sat without speaking for several seconds. How did you notice something that everyone else missed? Claire looked toward Lily's bedroom before answering. Years ago, my father became seriously ill after drinking from the wrong cup at work. It was never intentional. Someone stored a cleaning chemical in an unmarked container. The investigation called it a terrible accident. Her fingers tightened gently around the warm mug. Ever since then, I have paid attention whenever food or drinks are left unattended. Old habits stay with you. Ethan understood. Now, it was not professional training that had guided her. It was painful memory. His eyes drifted toward a framed certificate hanging beside the hallway. Nursing program. Chicago Community College. Claire noticed him reading it. I completed 2 years before Lily was born. Why did you stop? She smiled sadly without self-pity. Tuition became impossible after her father left. Rent did not wait. Diapers did not wait. Life rarely waits. Ethan lowered his coffee onto the table. Every answer she gave was simple, honest, and completely free of bitterness. She never blamed anyone. She never asked for sympathy. She had quietly saved his life, accepted losing her job, returned home to care for her daughter, and now offered coffee to the man who had allowed her to walk away without a single question. For perhaps the first time in many years, Ethan Carter realized that true strength did not always stand behind a boardroom podium. Sometimes it lived inside a small apartment where an exhausted mother chose kindness long after the world had stopped being kind to her. The apartment settled into comfortable silence as rain began tapping gently against the windows. Ethan looked around once more, noticing details he had overlooked when he first arrived. Every light bulb was the same warm color, probably chosen because softer light helped Lily sleep. A stack of children's library books sat beside the couch with handwritten return dates tucked inside the front covers. Even the old kitchen table had been repaired instead of replaced, its worn surface carefully sanded and painted by someone who believed broken things could still have value. Claire rinsed the coffee mugs before turning off the kitchen light to save electricity. It was such an ordinary gesture that Ethan almost missed it. "Claire," he said quietly, "I owe you far more than an apology." She leaned against the counter and waited patiently. "The physicians believe your decision prevented something that could have become much worse. I cannot ignore that." She smiled politely. "You do not have to." Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a business card along with a sealed envelope. "This is not charity," he said carefully. "Inside the envelope is compensation for the income you lost tonight, and the card is my direct number. Tomorrow my company will offer you a position with full benefits. You will never have to worry about temporary shifts again." Claire looked at the envelope but made no effort to take it. "That is generous." "It is not generosity. It is gratitude." She shook her head with gentle respect. "Mr. Carter, if I accept money because I helped someone, then tonight becomes a transaction instead of a choice." Ethan blinked, surprised by the answer. "You saved my life. I helped a person. That person happened to be me." Claire's smile softened. "If another guest had been sitting in your chair, I would have done exactly the same thing." Ethan had negotiated billion-dollar acquisitions with executives who never hesitated to ask for more. Yet the woman standing before him quietly refused everything he offered without sounding proud or offended. She simply believed that kindness lost something important the moment it carried a price tag. "Then at least let me offer you the job," Ethan insisted. "You deserve stability. Health care for Lily. A salary that respects your abilities." Claire glanced toward the bedroom door where her daughter continued sleeping peacefully. "May I ask you something?" "Anything. If you had never discovered what happened with the glasses tonight, would that job still exist?" Ethan answered honestly. "No." She nodded. "Then I cannot accept it because of one evening. I would rather earn an opportunity than receive one because someone feels indebted to me." Ethan leaned back slowly, absorbing every word. It was not pride that guided her. It was dignity. She wanted a future she could explain to her daughter without leaving out a single detail. At that moment, a small voice drifted down the hallway. "Mom." Claire immediately excused herself and hurried into the bedroom. Ethan remained seated, listening as Lily sleepily asked for a glass of water. Claire's reassuring voice answered with quiet warmth, followed by the soft sound of a bedtime story continuing from the page where they had stopped the night before. Ethan stared at the business card still resting on the table. For years he had believed success was measured by numbers on financial reports and signatures on contracts. Tonight, an exhausted single mother had quietly taught him another measure entirely. Character revealed itself most clearly when no one was watching, no reward was expected, and doing the right thing came with a personal cost. As Claire returned carrying the now empty water glass, Ethan slipped the unopened envelope back into his coat. He understood something important at last. If he truly wanted to honor the woman who had protected him, he would first have to respect the one thing she refused to surrender, her dignity. When Ethan finally stepped back into the waiting sedan, the city looked different than it had an hour earlier. The towers downtown no longer impressed him as much as the modest apartment he had just left behind. During the drive home, he said almost nothing. Lauren sat beside him reviewing updates from the gala investigation until her phone vibrated again. She glanced at the screen before looking toward Ethan. The preliminary report just came in. Ethan raised his eyes. Go on. The laboratory found traces of an unidentified chemical in the glass that remained at the gala. The physicians believe it was fortunate no one consumed more than a very small amount. Ethan stared through the rain-covered window without speaking. Claire had trusted her instincts when everyone else had trusted appearances. Lauren continued reading. Security also identified the unidentified guest from the surveillance footage. He registered under the name Michael Turner. Registered? Ethan asked quietly. Yes, but the identification appears to be false. The address does not exist, and the phone number belongs to a prepaid device that has already been disconnected. Ethan slowly folded his hands together. Someone planned this. The following morning, Carter Global Headquarters returned to its usual rhythm of meetings, presentations, and quarterly reports, but Ethan's attention remained elsewhere. He ordered a complete review of every guest invited to the charity gala and instructed corporate security to cooperate fully with local investigators. Shortly before noon, the head of security entered Ethan's office carrying another file. Sir, there is something else. Ethan looked up immediately. What is it? The surveillance team reviewed exterior cameras from the neighborhood around Miss Bennett's apartment after you left. Ethan's expression sharpened. Why? Because the unidentified guest from the gala appears again. The room became completely silent. The security director placed several printed images across Ethan's desk. They showed a dark sedan parked half a block from Claire's apartment shortly after midnight. Another camera captured the same vehicle, leaving nearly 20 minutes later. A final image revealed a man inside wearing the same navy overcoat seen at the gala. Ethan studied the photographs carefully. He followed her. That is our concern. Lauren spoke before anyone else could. Perhaps it is simply a coincidence. The security director slowly shook his head. We checked traffic cameras. The vehicle remained near the building long after Mr. Carter departed, then drove away only after all apartment lights were turned off. Ethan stood so abruptly that his chair rolled backward across the hardwood floor. Has anyone informed the police? Yes, sir. They are reviewing the information now. Ethan looked once more at the photographs. Claire had unknowingly interrupted someone's carefully planned scheme. Whether that person had intended to harm him or simply create chaos no longer mattered. What mattered was that Claire had become the only witness who noticed something unusual before anyone else did. She had never considered herself important. Unfortunately, someone else might. Ethan picked up his phone without hesitation. Lauren, clear my afternoon schedule. Where are you going? She asked. Back to South Halsted Street. Sir, perhaps we should wait for the authorities. Ethan slowly placed the photographs into a folder. Yesterday, she protected a stranger without expecting anything in return. Today, she might not even realize she needs someone protecting her. At that exact moment, several miles away, Claire finished wiping down the tables inside a neighborhood bakery where she had picked up another temporary shift after losing the catering job. She greeted customers with the same gentle smile she offered everyone, completely unaware that across the street a familiar dark sedan had quietly stopped once again, its driver remaining motionless behind tinted windows while watching the entrance with patient, unsettling attention. The bell above the bakery door chimed softly as Claire handed a warm loaf of sourdough to an elderly customer who thanked her with a grateful smile. It was just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and the small neighborhood shop smelled of cinnamon, fresh coffee, and butter. For Claire, it felt like every other temporary job she had accepted over the past several years. She focused on remembering customers' names, cleaning tables between orders, and checking her phone every hour for updates from Lily's kindergarten. Ordinary routines had always been her safest place. Across the street, Ethan's sedan rolled quietly to the curb. He noticed the same dark vehicle parked 50 yards away with its engine running. That is the car from the photographs, the security director said from the passenger seat. Ethan nodded once. Stay here. Call the detectives. Before anyone could stop him, Ethan stepped onto the sidewalk and entered the bakery. Claire looked up in surprise as the familiar figure approached the counter. Mr. Carter? She asked. What are you doing here? Ethan lowered his voice. I need you to come with me. Claire frowned gently. I still have 3 hours left on my shift. Before Ethan could answer, the bakery owner emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of fresh pastries. Everything all right? He asked. Ethan smiled politely. I hope so. At that exact moment, The bell above the entrance rang again. The man wearing the navy overcoat walked inside with calm, measured steps. Claire immediately recognized him. It was the same guest she had seen near the serving station at the gala. Their eyes met for the briefest moment before his expression changed almost imperceptibly. Ethan noticed Claire's face lose its color. "Is it him?" he asked quietly. Claire gave the smallest possible nod. Ethan stepped half a pace closer without drawing attention. "Please stay behind me." The man glanced around the bakery, apparently realizing that several customers, employees, and large front windows made the crowded shop a poor place for any confrontation. He offered a polite smile to the cashier nearest the register, purchased a bottled water he clearly did not want, then calmly walked back outside. Seconds later, two unmarked police vehicles turned onto the street. Detectives who had already been monitoring the neighborhood recognized the dark sedan from the surveillance report and moved quickly to speak with its driver before he could leave. The man offered no resistance, but investigators soon discovered multiple false identification cards inside the vehicle along with documents connecting him to financial fraud involving one of Carter Global's largest pending acquisitions. The charity gala had not been a random target after all. Investigators later explained that creating confusion around Ethan Carter during the event could have delayed a critical business agreement worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Claire listened quietly as the detectives thanked her for noticing the unusual movement that night. One detective smiled warmly. "Most people would never have seen what you saw." Claire answered honestly. "I almost convinced myself I had imagined it." Ethan looked at her with quiet admiration. "But you trusted your conscience anyway." Hours later, after formal statements had been completed, Ethan walked Claire back to the bakery. The owner greeted her with unexpected enthusiasm. "You still have a job here if you want it," he said with a grin. "Anyone who protects people instead of panicking is exactly the kind of employee I want." Claire laughed for the first time since the gala. Ethan smiled as well, but another thought had already taken root in his mind. She had refused every reward offered because she wanted opportunity instead of obligation. This time, he would find a way to give her exactly that, not as repayment for saving him, but because the world deserved to see what he had finally learned. True leadership did not begin with power. It began with recognizing quiet courage before everyone else did. 1 year later, sunlight poured through the tall windows of the newly opened Carter Community Health Learning Center, filling the lobby with warmth instead of ceremony. Children laughed near a colorful reading corner, while nursing students toured classrooms equipped with modern medical training equipment. Along one wall hung a simple bronze plaque that read, "Kindness changes lives long before anyone notices." Ethan Carter had insisted those words be placed there, not beside his own name, but where every visitor would see them first. Reporters gathered outside for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, expecting another announcement about philanthropy or corporate expansion. Instead, Ethan stepped to the podium and spoke about a woman most of them had never heard of. "A year ago," he began, "someone made a quiet decision that reminded me leadership begins long before titles, wealth, or recognition. Sometimes courage looks like choosing to protect another person when no one is watching." Sitting quietly in the front row, Claire Bennett lowered her eyes, wishing the attention would move elsewhere. She was no longer working temporary jobs. After completing a competitive interview process open to hundreds of applicants, she had accepted a position coordinating community outreach programs for the Carter Foundation. Ethan had honored his promise to create opportunity instead of charity. Every interview panel member except Ethan had evaluated her qualifications without knowing her identity, and she had earned the position on her own merit. Even more meaningful to Claire, the foundation had partnered with a local college to provide scholarships for single parents pursuing careers in healthcare. That autumn, she returned to finish the nursing degree she had once believed would remain unfinished forever. Lily, now 6 years old, sat beside her wearing a bright yellow dress and proudly holding a small drawing she had made that morning. It showed 3 smiling stick figures standing beneath a large blue sky. When Ethan stepped down from the stage after the ceremony, Lily ran toward him with the fearless honesty only children possess. "I made this for you," she said, handing him the picture. Ethan knelt to her height and accepted it with both hands as though she had given him something priceless. "Thank you," he said warmly. "I think this belongs in my office." Lily pointed to the drawing. "That is Mommy. That is me." And that is you because mommy says good people help each other. Ethan looked at Claire, who smiled with quiet embarrassment. She remembers everything, Claire said softly. The important things, Ethan replied. Later that afternoon, after the guests had gone home and the cameras had disappeared, Claire stood alone in one of the new training classrooms, arranging books on a shelf before the first group of scholarship students arrived the following week. Ethan entered carrying 2 paper cups of coffee. This time they were both clearly labeled with handwritten names across the lids. Claire laughed as he carefully placed them on the table. You are still checking the cups, she teased gently. Ethan smiled. Every single time. They stood together beside the window, overlooking families walking through the small community garden planted outside the center. Neither spoke for several moments. There was no need. Some conversations happened best in silence. Finally, Ethan looked toward the children playing beneath the afternoon sun. You changed my life that night, he said quietly. Claire shook her head with the same humble smile she had worn from the beginning. No, I simply noticed something everyone else missed. Ethan watched Lily chasing butterflies across the grass before answering with complete certainty. Exactly. And sometimes the people who quietly notice what everyone else overlooks become the reason hope survives. Wealth can build buildings, influence can open doors, but only kindness can change the direction of another person's life forever.